And it has actually a month and 2 Sundays. Um, so we'd started quite a while back looking at the minor prophets. And so we'll kind of kick off with looking at Obadiah this afternoon. But looking at the prophets and kind of refreshing ourselves and looking at their purpose is very important. A lot of times we're intimidated when we look at the prophets and we study them, and rightfully so. There's some of those, I'll tell you, I'm lost. There's some aspects of like Ezekiel that just, hard for us to understand. But the issue is that them, and I kind of really minimize the importance of prophets when I started preaching and studying, you're Christian. Well, that's what's going to save you, the New Testament. But the problem is when you get into like a book of Revelation, if you don't understand the language and the language, because God didn't create a whole new dictionary of Revelation. They're not unique. Language, they're in his vocabulary always. So when we look and understand it, back and really digging into the prophets, what I found was you learn more about God than anywhere else. God is the one holding the conversation. He's the one talking. At times, his sarcasm, you can sense his anguish and his broken heart, his joy over the thoughts and so many things that really in that expression and that communication, it's teaching us extremely valuable lessons. You're gonna have to maybe. I mean, there's no Judah, there's no Babylon, there's no that's like that. Some names and dates and you have they're not changing. What did Solomon say? There's nothing new under the sun. What goes up, comes down, goes around, and it's the same old stuff. And Obadiah is one of these that we're going to look at. What's fascinating to me is this is the smallest book in the Old Testament. 21 verses. And I always thought, and I think that may be why a lot of people just, they'll read it, but they don't. Sometimes you've known somebody message. And this is one. Obadiah is one of these. Now, so when we look, we know that this message is all around one core thought. It's very focused, and it's around the judgment against Edom. Now, geographically, when you look at Edom, Edom is in kind of, you'd think, not such a really strong, influential geographic location, but they are in the southern part Negev wilderness. They're lined up, and they did encounter, and we're going to talk more about important in looking at why this judgment is the way it is. So who is Obadiah? Well, honestly, no one knows exactly who he is. He doesn't talk about himself. Some of the prophets, they'll say something and they give us a clue. We can tell that they were a priest or they were of a royal descent. And we can date them even. They'll say during the king, they'll say King so-and-so, and we can really lock it in. Not with Obadiah. There's a lot of people have tried to grab and say, because there's a bunch of Obadiahs, by the way. It's almost like saying, the Smiths. In certain areas, you go to certain places in the country, and there's one surname, and there's a whole bunch. And this is Obadiah, and because it means servant of God. There's some fascinating ones. There's one that actually served in the house of Ahab. Very godly man. And there's been a lot of question. Here he is, a servant of God, serving for one of the most wicked kings ever. Remember Jezebel's wife? Yet he maintained a loyalty to God. There's other Obadiahs in even the descendant of David, but we honestly just don't really know. But we can look within the book itself and see two conditions. We can see the message because when Edom disappears, so we can tell Edom is still in the prophecy against it. We can also tell by correlating the use of their prophecies in their book, Jeremiah. Almost word, we'll look where Jeremiah uses almost the same. Now, I've always thought that's interesting because one, we always say there's one speaker, it's God. So God's going to use kind of the same usage phrases and such. But most scholars, they kind of give Obadiah the credit for this one that he quotes, that Jeremiah. You can tell Jeremiah is quoting. So he has read something that is causing him to then say this. And the other fascinating thing is that we can tell historically by some of the evidences internally, and like I said, by being quoted, that he's probably a contemporary of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So that now, when we start to look at this, we can kind of put him on a timeline, which is important to do when you look at the prophets, because if you don't know historically where you're at, are you, before the flood? Are you after the flood? Are you before David, after the David, during the time period of the judges? The removal of Israel? Is Israel still there? Are the nation divided? Are they united? It makes a big difference because it helps you to understand the geographical, social context of what's happening. And it really makes it a much richer study every time if you approach a prophet like that. So we know around 590. So in the time period of these other prophets, Israel is gone. The 10 northern. Now we're looking at the southern tribe of Judah, which comprises of. Now also remember, this is important. A little bit of this in this prophecy, and sometimes we forget this, but there's this prophecy that is always there saying that how God is going to restore all of Israel. All of them are going to come home, and indicating like as if all the tribes will be restored when we know historically, physically, they never did. The 10 northern tribes never come back. But what we miss is historically what happened whenever the kingdom divided and the false religion was established by Jeroboam, that the priests and a lot of people left. And they went down and started living in the tribe of Judah. We do have a remnant that is inside the tribe of Judah, but when God speaks a lot of times, you don't see that. Just looking historically and go, but they never came back. They're gone. There's some still within the tribe of Judah that will go off into captivity, and they're going to come back. They're just kind of assimilated, but the genealogy is still there, even though it may be murky, as we might say. 21 verses. And so what I want to do is I want to read it. Now, I'm reading from the ESV, and so I want to read it, and we're going to draw kind of 5 lessons out of this short little book and see what it has and how we can apply it today as well. And I want you to listen to the names that he's going to use. And do you know who are these characters and what other names do they go by? And if you're talking about Edom and you're hearing different names, what would that change? How would that change that message? I'll just leave it there and let you kind of think about that while we come into this. So let's start. Thus says the Lord of God concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent out among the nations. Rise up, let us rise up against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who have lived in the clefts of rock, in your lofty dwellings, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Though you soar like eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. If a thief came to you, if plunderers came by night, How have you been destroyed? Would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? How Esau has been pillaged, his treasure sought out. Your allies have driven you to your border. Those at peace with you have deceived you. They have prevailed against you. Those who eat your bread have set a trap beneath you. You have no understanding. Will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy the wise men out of Edom and the understanding out of Mount Esau? And your mighty men shall be dismayed, O Teman, so that every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by slaughter. Because of the violence you have done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On that day that you stood aloof, on the day that the strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gate and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. But do not gloat over the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. Do not boast in their day of distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroads to cut off his fugitives, and do not hand over his survivors in the day of his distress. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, so it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return to your own head. For as you have drunk on my holy mountain, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they never have been. But in Mount Zion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy. And the house of Jacob shall possess their own possessions, and the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. They shall burn them and consume them, and there shall be no survivor in the house of Esau, for the Lord hath spoken. Those of Negev shall possess Mount Esau, and those of Shephelah shall possess the land of the Philistines. They shall possess the land of Ephraim and the land of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. The exiles of the host of the people of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zepharah. And then the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Shephard shall possess the cities of Negev. Savior shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Zion, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. So just a feel for this letter when you read it, especially since it's short and you can kind of grab it and get that kind of flow. It's intense to the point where even if we were able to look at the sentence structure, the way the Hebrew is writing it, that Obadiah kind of breaks and shoots in kind of some more personal and emphasis, emotional about this message that's coming to them. And this is something that is also very marvelous that I think about having the prophets, all these different men who bring this message. It's the same message. It's not changed. But when you add somebody like a Amos, who was a goat herder out in the middle of nowhere, to a Hosea, who is a man of education, and Jeremiah, who is from the tribe of Levi, you get a different message, and it's shaped different. And so it's kind of fascinating. We don't know a lot about Obadiah, but we can still kind of see the passion that he has for his message that he's bringing to them. So lesson one, we see that the idea that God is expressing here is that he has the right and the authority to choose whoever he wills and whatever he purposes he wills. That's a lot when you think of this. But think, now, who's he talking to? So let's set the stage. Who are the characters in this story? Edom. Well, who's Edom? Well, Edom, you heard the name Esau. The Edomites, they're the descendants of Esau. You notice how that he talks and he uses the word Jacob? We're getting some reverb back. The name Joseph. Now, remember, Jacob's name was changed to what? To Israel. That's a more formal, proper, different by God. But these is this. So he doesn't call Esau brother. and he's looking at something that we controversy in their relationship. Even from birth, there's this struggle from within, and how they were going to, who's going to end up with the birthright, and his birthright was sold, to Jacob. Esau gave that birthright up, became very embittered, and father. And we know that the actual blessing, and then we see Esau is so angered that he vows that once dad dies, I'm coming after you. Jacob flees. He's gone from age 40 to nearly 80, returns back. But that was a reconciliation, wasn't it? So you think, wow, they got along. Remember, all these brothers who were not accepted, that you think that God has rejected, God still blessed them. They're still a descendant of Abraham. They're just not the ones that God is utilizing to be appointed the Messiah. It's not like he hates them. Now that's a misnomer, because people say, Paul said, God loved Jacob and hated Esau. And I covered that in a lesson because it's fascinating. If you go where he's quoting that from, that word hate in the Hebrew is different. It's not our type of a hate. It's dislike. It chose in preference of Jacob, but not in the hatred like we have. Cared for all of them, but he covenant promise fulfilling. They were blessed in general. And this reconciliation, remember, when it occurred and Jacob tried to give Esau all the gifts, what did Esau say? I'm a rich man. I don't need your stuff. He had been blessed. He wasn't angry. There was no animosity. Even when dad died, they buried him. So something went wrong, didn't it? It seems jealousy historically continued beyond even Esau. Even though Esau reconciled, this family, jealousy and looking at their cousins and how they're being blessed and they're the chosen. You can just see this type. Somehow, we don't really have a record about the so he did, but towards the children of Israel. So that's something that we see that he had. Now, when he opens this up, he starts right away, vision of Obadiah. That's the only way we know. And talking about this humble. Now, you notice that there's a couple of places he's going to bring this up, this idea of humility. The Edomites were very secure. They were very blessed. Even in the condition at this point in time, they're located geographically, they were very secure. They were doing well, but their behavior is what becomes such an abomination to God. And so we see how humility, he's saying, I will help you. And that this type of information or this knowledge God has gained, and look what it says, the way it says, he has taken and sent forth a messenger among where? Nations. You know what God's doing? This is how God works. So this is not something outdated. This is how is going on, is God has seen and judged. He made a judgment, and now he's carrying forth his judgment. And it's going to be through stirring up the other nations. Remember Habakkuk. Habakkuk was wanting judgment. He's like, come on, bring them in. We're so ungodly. And so when God answered, said, yep, I'm going to bring in the Assyrians. Habakkuk went, whoa, pump the brakes, God. Wait a minute. Whoa, what's wrong here? They're worse than we are. And God said, hold on. Because as soon as they become haughty, I'm going to take them out. And if you'll recall, they tried to go into Judah, and their arrogance, they sent the ambassador in front of the wall when they were seizing, when Hezekiah was king. And he pronounces in Hebrew to them, my king has killed all the gods, and now he's here to kill your God. And then what happened overnight? 125,000 die. King Sargon goes back home, and he's assassinated in his own temple of his false god by his sons. So, exactly what I told Habakkuk. What do we see? God is doing this again, the same thing. He is going to use all these nations. The irony is he's actually going to use the very ones that they're allied to. The very ones are going to rise up against him. And so he's going to switch them from being respected at that last part there where he says utterly despised. They're going to go from this prominence among the Gentile nations down to where they're going to be despised and hated. And so this idea of humbling them is because the next thing we see, the lesson we can pull from this is that God hates pride. Why? Because it deceives you. And that's a deception that Edom is under. They're under this deception that somehow they're invincible, that they're above judgment. And they literally had homes and a place carved in rocks up high. You heard him saying Mount Esau, that was kind of impenetrable. You couldn't really attack them. They were very secure. And so this type of arrogance, he says, but it deceives us. That's the big problem. And this pride is exactly what it's done here. The arrogance in their hearts is what is deceiving them. That's what pride does to people, doesn't it? Pride comes before the fall. Why would somebody proud fall? Because they don't think they can fall. They're deceived. They're delusional. And that's what he says. And that's why he describes, you're deceived. You think because you can live in these very secure places, in this loftiness, in other words, of elevated location on Mount Esau, that you can't be touched. No. And so their pride says to them, who can bring us down? Nobody can bring us down. There's a lot of nations throughout history we can go back and study that rose up throughout history that were very, very strong. And they came down pretty hard. And every nation. I mean, what nation is around? I mean, the Roman Empire lasted, nearly 800, 900 years. And they're not around. Go to Rome, what's left of them? You can see some roads, actually, some old roads, and they're digging stuff up in England, but they're gone. Their pride, their foolishness, they're self-secure in their own wisdom and knowledge, because that's the other part that we see with pride, is how are they allowing themselves to be proud? Is because they believe they're so smart. They believe that they've accomplished a certain level. And that's where this idea of this loftiness, it's not only loftiness literally, geographically, where they're living, but it's a loftiness of attitude that they have and of spirit. And so they say, nah, nobody can touch us at all. And this also reflects this idea that is very against God, is this pride, his hatred. So God's already got something against them before they've even done anything. And the idea that they're setting themselves apart from God, setting themselves and trying to elevate themselves above God. And every time that happens, but he's now going to talk, that's bad enough, in other words, but this is what you're doing. And their behaviors, it carries out the pride that they then strike out. The next lesson, judgment will always overcome any reliance on physical strength or mental craftiness. God's judgment will always triumph over that. And that's where he talks about this very personal way God's going to take them out, is using their own friends to assault him. It's one thing, you get run over by the bully or the enemy, but man, when it's your best friend, wow. You'll be like America all of a sudden being attacked and destroyed by England or a nation that has always been considered as an ally, and to come in and to plunder us. China, okay, we got that. Yeah, they're not our friends. North Korea, yeah. But this is what God's going to do. And he describes it even worse than just being robbed when he says, thief comes by robbers, a lot of times they just take what they need. They take what they haul, leave. These who really cared about you, that you thought were your buddies, and really were in cahoots, and they put you up in self-esteem, they're not only going to rob you, they're going to take everything. They're going to totally annihilate you. God's going to use them, turn against them and ransack them, overpower them. And, he says those who sit there and have this common, fellowship with him in bread, they're going to be the very ones that are going to set up that ambush. God's not going to bring some foreign army from thousands of miles away and have them start invading like he did Israel, where everybody could see the Assyrians coming and going, oh man, here they come, here they come. This is a personal judgment attack that's unique. This is unique. A lot of times, like I said, you could see Egypt marching up, attacking. But this is going to be total surprise. And it's to show them that your wisdom is foolishness before God. You're not going to be able to sustain yourself. The next lesson we see is that God is jealous for his people. And just as he was jealous for all descendants of Abraham, but especially those that he set forward this commitment and faithfulness towards the descendants that are going to bring forward the seed line through Isaac, Jacob, and on down. And that's why he's going to protect them. It's one thing for, the descendants of Abraham, Esau and all them, to be in sin, he blesses them. But to then turn on others, it's a little worse than just kissing cousins. This is something that they shared Abraham, and they shared a very strong lineage, and God, through that relationship, had been blessing them, and they should have been supporting the fulfillment of this covenant relationship starting with Abraham. And they've done right the opposite. They didn't just sit on the sidelines. They actually got involved and started that. And that's why he brings that. Because of the violence to your brother Jacob, not Israel. Notice he's saying the violence you brought against your brother. And he says this is going to cut you off forever. Are there any Edomites today? No. Archaeology has dug up some ruins and stuff, but they became assimilated and disappeared. They're not in existence. Because why? Because on the day that your brother was being attacked, you stood by and you watched. Not only did you stand by, but you helped them load the carts. You went into Jerusalem with them, and you rejoiced in the fact that they were being brought down. And on top of that bad, the refuge that were fleeing, they were capturing them, turning them over. That, you say, okay. And then on top of that, they were going in and living in cities and occupying it. The cities that had been, the captives had been ripped off the land that was Judah, they come in and just take it. And watching that. And that's why that of don't gloat. It's your brother's calamity. So how does that apply to us? A lot of times we have to be careful because we look, don't we? And we see a lot of evil people suffering some terrible things to them. And it's hard not to be a little happy, right? But I think, we need to be careful that our pride as well can step up and look at this. And they're as well sinners, and we're not any better. We're sinners as well. For us to rejoice in the violence that may come upon people who are not Christians is horrible. Any violence that's happening, even through a judgment, when you watch somebody being sentenced and punished, and we understand that maybe they deserve it, we need to have a little compassion, because there's always hope of the Word of God reaching their hearts at some point. And that's where we have to be very careful. And that's what they didn't do, that they just sat back and did this. And so, Zechariah in 2:8, he uses this beautiful description of God saying to his people about they're the apple of his eye. And so they were just wicked in the way they treated him. And so he will hold us accountable when we start to really just gloat and rejoice in the fact that evil is being so severely punished and suffering because of that. So don't gloat on that day, he says, because of this destruction that's going on. That's what they did. It just, to me, one of the worst things that you can do is try to take advantage of an opportunity that others are suffering through their sinfulness. And not only just emotionally, but this is one where, again, this goes back to Abraham. This goes back to those two brothers. And they had reconciled. You know, I used to always go all the way back to Esau and just say, look what you did, you know. But, you know, no, if you go back and look, Esau and Jacob reconciled. And Esau was blessed. And he understood that. But his descendants somehow felt that their dad was robbed by Jacob. And yet they shared the same father and same promise and the same blessings, but different blessings. And yet they violated that trust. And so that's what brought that judgment upon them. So he says they brought it upon their own head. One word where he talks about in Mount Zion that's interesting, and I want to talk about that, when he talks about this drinking of the cup in Jerusalem, is fascinating because that is drinking of judgment. And what God has drawn a picture there is that basically, yes, Judah did drink a cup of God's wrath, but in a way, you are rejoicing at it. And what he's saying, that what comes around goes around, and not only are you going to drink it, but you're going to gulp it. You're going to get this wrath, this drinking of this cup. And he shows restoration and how, you know, you're going to see this happen, and they're going to suffer, but they're coming back. And they're going to come back. And then that's where he says how Jacob and who? Joseph. It's kind of beautiful, isn't it? Joseph, that young man who went off and helped bring forward and protect the children of Israel as they lived in Egypt, and then and brought out by Moses. But this idea that, you know, this is on your head, and so just the way that these nations are going to read that you're going to drink this cup of wrath as well. The other idea, you notice that he says is also they're not going to be alone in their punishment. Others as well are going to be punished with it. So that's the little book with a big message. We're going to continue next week. We'll look at some more, survey some other, the minor prophets, and looking at, I don't know when we'll get through. We'll take on the big prophets and look. I think it'll be a beneficial study as well. So if you're with us, though, this evening, and there's something we can do to assist you in your relationship with the Lord, we hope that you will take this song as we're singing it, meditate upon it, think upon it, and if there's any action at all, either becoming a child of God's or restoring yourself, and we can pray and help you and encourage you, we hope you'd let us know while we stand and sing.